I am drawn to the idea that perhaps he has a point. I mean, it's a very arresting opening, isn't it? Over 50s looking for work should consider delivering takeaways and other flexible jobs typically occupied by younger people. Now, I am struck increasingly by how violently out of touch the current generation of Tory politicians seem to be. I mean, you get a fairly clear indication of how completely out of touch with reality they are from the fact that they think 30p Lee is a sort of typical example of a working man in the East Midlands, as somebody whose IQ, if it were to breach double figures, he probably wouldn't be able to add it up himself. The problem that they have, though, is that they haven't got a Scooby-Doo what life is like outside their own tiny little bubble. And therefore they might be saying things that are completely detached from reality. What do I mean by that? I mean by that the possibility that if you were over 50 and looking for work, I think you've probably already tried everything. No? Do you see what I mean? This notion that, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that, is a little bit like that time one of them came out and said, oh, you know, there's a value range in the supermarket. Again, not as ignorant as 30p Lee suggesting that you could feed your family for sixpence, but thinking that people who were struggling to meet their food bills would not be aware of the fact that there are some cheaper beans in that aisle over there than the ones that you normally buy. That's a really good example. We probably should have gone in a little bit harder than that, shouldn't we? Well, because that's an astonishing illustration of where we are as a country with this current crop of Conservatives in power. You say to them, I actually can't pay my bills. The number of parents, I don't know how across this you are, but the number of parents who are going without food because of the cost of living crisis is, I mean, it's a national scandal. It's a national disaster. It goes more or less unmentioned by Rishi Sunak and his mates. But the idea that you're skipping meals to make sure that the kids can at least get some scran, and that fella, I'll remember who it was in a moment, but one of these Tories turns around to you and says, are you aware of value range food? I think was it Jake Berry? It might have been Jake Berry. That's a remarkable moment, actually. There's so many remarkable moments these days that perhaps we lose sight of some of them. But that's a truly remarkable moment. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Tory. I was not aware of the fact that food had different prices and that you don't just have to go into the... Do you know, I mean, no wonder I'm not being able to feed the... I've been buying everything in Fortnum and Mason's. I had no idea there were cheaper shops. What would we do without such amazing, coruscating, sparkling insights from our Conservative politicians? Cheaper food, you say? What? Really? You don't have to get everything in the Harrods Food Hall? You can go to cheaper shops and what they have different priced foods in the same shop, so a tin of own brand beans is cheaper than Heinz, you say? Well, colour me shocked. Thank you. Thank you, Master. That's an astonishing little bit of info. Do you see what I mean? Imagine being that person, thinking that was helpful advice. And so that's why I wonder whether Mel Stride deserves a fair hearing or whether he deserves a fair... It was George Eustace, I think. He's on his way out anyway, isn't he? I was writing about him the other day because he's one of those people who told us everything was going to be hunky-dory. Comes from a farming family. And not only is he running for the hills with the rest of them, but he kind of now is pouring cold water all over the stuff that's been done. The Australian trade deal, for example. He led the criticism of it. But this weird Brexit taboo that seems to dominate the right-wing media, i.e. almost all of the media in this country. Someone like George Eustace should be on a charge. What do you mean? And Rees-Mogg got a flipping knighthood. Have you seen the news today about customs checks coming into this country? They're postponing them again. Do you know why? Yeah, because it's going to increase the amount of red tape and costs for importers. Everybody knew what they were voting for. You voted to get rid of red tape and for cheaper food. Rees-Mogg told you there'd be cheaper food. He said cheap food for peasants. And it's actually going to be more expensive. And it's already more expensive. And there's already more red tape. And the government is legally required to introduce more checks at our border and is postponing it again because they're worried that it will cost so much it will actually impact upon inflation, which is already sky high, although thankfully, finally, perhaps heading in the right direction. But everybody knew exactly what they were voting for. It's all So Rees-Mogg lies through his teeth. Well, maybe that's not fair. He was too thick to understand the fact that he was lying. Lies through his teeth, or was too thick to understand the fact that he was lying about what was going to happen. He gets a knighthood. And you just get more expensive food. And what I think is interesting, and I need to double check this with an expert, so I almost certainly shouldn't say it out loud on live radio at 10:10 on a Thursday morning. But I think we might be flirting with a breach of World Trade Organization rules. Because if the checks for EU goods coming into this country are less stringent than the checks for non-EU goods coming into this country at the moment, then we're in breach of WTO rules. Do you remember when all the bozos were shouting, WTO, let's go WTO, without even knowing the first thing about what that actually meant? I say bozos, many of them were cabinet ministers. But wouldn't that be ironic? Wouldn't that be ironic if it turns out actually that Johnson's Brexit and the fact that they're postponing some of the negative impacts of it puts us in breach of WTO rules? I'll check that out. So we've got George Eustace's model here. We've got George Eustace's example of saying something so pant-wettingly patronising that you can't quite believe that it came out of even his mouth. That was on the notion of there being cheaper food available. Single mothers up and down the country going, well, you mean we don't have to do all our shopping in Fortnum's? Oh, that's fantastic. And now I wonder whether Mel Stride deserves the same treatment. But you're going to tell me. Here's what he's actually said. What we're seeing here is the ability to log on and off at any time you like. There's no requirement to have to do a certain number of hours over a certain period of time, which is driving huge opportunities. I always find myself thinking, go on then, pal, you go first. Go on, Mr. Stride, you hop on your moped, you start delivering pizzas at 10 o'clock at night. But they don't, do they? They're never talking about themselves, they're always talking about you. There are loads of great opportunities out there for people, and it's of course good for people to consider options they might not have otherwise thought of. So you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs, you can't get arrested, universal credit is barely going to touch the sides, you're as skint as the skintest person in Skintland, and there's job adverts in the newspaper, or there's job adverts online, forgive my illustration of my own age, and you haven't thought of looking at, oh, what's that you say? I can apply for these jobs, can I? Oh, thank you, Mr. Stride. Thank you kindly, Mr. Stride, sir. I'll be applying, but doff cap, tug, faller, I'll be applying for one of these jobs that you've brought to my attention. Too sweet. Gosh, I might be able to eat next week. I don't know. Maybe I'm doing him a disservice. From an employer's point of view, in a tight labour market, it's absolutely essential if you want to access all the available talent that you provide as flexible an offer as you can. So the suggestion clearly in the Times is that over-50s should apply for jobs traditionally seen as being for younger people. It was during a visit to the food delivery company Deliveroo that he said this. And it just occurs to me that, albeit that they've seen a 62% increase in riders aged over 50 since 2021, the idea that there are thousands of people over 50 listening to this programme and presenting it, there are thousands of people over 50 listening to this programme who are now feeling that light bulb ignite above their head, or illuminate actually, you don't want it to ignite. That light bulb's just flicked on and you've got, oh, I can apply for these jobs, can I? And then we'll do the politics of it. The optics of it. I don't know how we navigate the snobbery element of this, because I hate the topics that implicitly suggest that some jobs are inferior. You know, there was a phrase that was popular in the 80s. It may have been Douglas Coupland, the author of Generation X, that came up with it actually, the muck jobs. David Graeber, the great Labour thinker, went a little further and a little deeper into the concept of jobs that are meaningless. But muck jobs, service sector, low-skilled work is still honourable, you know. And yet a conversation like this struggles, I think, always to navigate that minefield. I mean, I wouldn't want my mum going out to deliver pizzas. I hope that's not sort of patronising or paternalistic or even mildly misogynistic. I don't know why I feel like that. Oh, she couldn't do it now, but I'm thinking of when she was in her 60s perhaps. So the politics of it, the suggestion to you, the life you've led, the things you've done, the places you've been, you find yourself unexpectedly underemployed. Mel Stride, the business secretary, thinks you should get a job as a delivery driver. I just want to know what you think about that. Andrea's in Huntly in Scotland. Andrea, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello,
nice
Andrea.
to speak to you again.
Likewise.
I'm not quite so nervous this time.
That's
so
how it
hopefully
works. I am, though. That's weird. I'm absolutely bricking it. I've got no idea what you're going to say. Go on.
I was made redundant when I was 60, and I loved my job. I worked as an area manager for a stroke charity.
Oh, yes.
And I adored my job, and the whole thing changed, and I was made redundant. Now, also, I'm a WASPy woman. When I was 55, I was told that I could retire at 60.
Yeah.
I'm now just coming up to 66. Now, I did get other jobs. I worked as a support worker. These are the jobs I could get as care. And they were all very, very physical.
Right.
And in my 60s, although it's not chronic, I do have arthritis, and it hurts,
Yes,
and
I do.
physically, I could not do these 12-hour shifts and long hours and stuff. I was absolutely in agony.
I'm sorry.
So what I ended up doing was cashing in my pension, selling my flat. I now live in rented accommodation, and I live on my savings until my state pension kicks in next month.
Gosh.
And although I understand where Mel Stride's coming from, physically, once you get to your 60s, I'm sorry, there's very few of us that don't have aches and pains and can do these very physical jobs.
Yes. How old is he? Do we know?
I don't know.
He's 61.
I don't know.
He's 61.
Is he?
Yeah.
I wonder if he'd like to spend 12 hours helping people in and out of wheelchairs or cycling around town on Deliveroo bikes.
Oh, you see, you could be a Channel 5 commissioning editor with ideas like that, Andrea. You see, that's relatively unstrenuous. You'd be able to accommodate all your aches and pains sitting behind a desk in Soho, calling people looking for presenters. But no, I don't think he would, looking at him. I don't think he'd last 10 minutes. And that's part of the problem with this story, because you said you can see where he's coming from. I'm not quite sure. I think you're being too nice. I'm not quite sure you can. Where is he? Tell me where you think he is coming from.
I think there are a lot of us in our late 50s, 60s who, for whatever reason, have lost out on jobs.
Yes.
And yes, we're living on our savings because actually there's little choice.
And he sees
I
that.
tried dog walking for a while.
Gosh.
And yes, it's a little bit of extra pocket money, but it's not enough to live on.
No, so he sees people who would prefer to be working and aren't working as much as they would like to. And then he sees a space at Deliveroo, and he puts two and two together and comes up with 5 1/4, really, because you don't fit into that space. Yes,
and I'm sure there are many over 60s who would be physically able, but not for very long.
Mike's in Haarlem in the Netherlands. Mike, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
well, I'm 70 and I've been riding for Uber Eats for 4 years.
Fantastic. Tell me more.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. It's not for everyone, and I'm actually in the Netherlands, as you said, which has got fantastic cycling infrastructure.
Yes.
Which makes it much safer to do. But I think in the UK, I don't know how people do it in London because it's so dangerous being on a bike or a moped.
Yeah, I saw David. You remember David Frost, not the good one off the telly, but the weird one who did the Brexit negotiations. He the other day was talking about how. Cycling is for poor countries. It's for people who aren't successful enough to have cars. He said that if you go to poor countries, everyone's riding bikes, but you don't see bikes in rich countries. Cause,
that's a load of rubbish.
Well, yeah, I know, but he's on brand at least, isn't he? It's the biggest load of rubbish he said since the last load of rubbish that he said. But I would be a lot more amenable to the idea of working on a bicycle or even commuting on a bicycle in Holland than I would be in London.
Yeah, I've got an electric bike as well, which is fantastic.
Yeah, you're cheating then.
No, because you can switch off the power.
No, you can. And you must be, I think you must be a particularly fit 70-year-old.
Who knows? But anyway, it keeps you fit, And I think that the thing about what Mel Stride said, which I think is good, is, some people think I'm mad, and sometimes I'm a little bit embarrassed about doing it because people think it's just for, students and stuff like that. I'm at my age, I'm quite passionate about people not being ageist,
yes,
and
good for you.
jobs for anyone. So I think that. But the thing about get on your bike and deliver pizzas is just to make extra money.
You seem to be coming from a very particular perspective on this, rather than being necessarily representative of a huge cohort of 70-year-olds. And forgive me if this is if I'm prying too much. Tell me to shut up. Are you reliant upon the money that you earn?
No, I have personally, I have a target, because I've got a pension,
Sure.
et cetera, et cetera. But obviously, the money is useful, and
Yes.
and you can't sit in all day, watching Bargain Hunt.
No, you can't. Nothing against Bargain Hunt, but
No.
one can have too much of a good thing.
Yeah, and I think also what's interesting is something you said earlier, which I agree with you, because my first job when I was a student was working in retail. I worked at Harrods, and I thought it was a fantastic job.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Same.
And I think there is an issue about people being snobbish about jobs.
So I think it's because of the lived experience, the heritage of servants. I think that the English, the British attitude is still a little bit steeped in Victorian era and Downton Abbey and upstairs, downstairs, and we think there's something. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but other countries don't have that. You don't have it in America. You don't have it in much of Europe. You don't. Hospitality is probably an even better example than retail, Mike. You speak to Fred Sirieix about hospitality as a Frenchman who's lived in Britain all his life, and it drives him potty that we look down our noses at people in front of house work in restaurants, because we should, but we do, and it is a peculiarly Anglo-Saxon thing that you don't get it in other countries.